How wide is my oven? Okay, let's find out. It is, the inside is 20. All right, so I'll just tell you how wide these things are. These are 24 inches. I know that these grates are 24, sorry, 24 by 16. Okay, so what to do if the levain recipe didn't make as much as it was supposed to? Kind of don't understand this question because whatever recipe you're following, the levain is supposed to be exactly what that recipe needs. So if it didn't make enough of what it needs, you can extend your fermentation a little bit. So extend your fermentation so that when you bake, it will be at around the sweet spot of fermentation. So let's say for my country sourdough, I only gave it 50 grams of starter instead of 100 grams of starter, right? So then that means I need to extend either my bulk proof or my cold proof by like double. How many loaves do you usually mix at one time in your KitchenAid? Okay, so I opted to get this KitchenAid commercial 8-quart KitchenAid because I wanted a mixer that was multi-purpose, not just like a commercial bread mixer. And I can fit like 4 loaves in there. If I really wanted to push it, I can fit 6, but I try not to do that. You don't want to burn out your mixer just for that one bake. So I comfortably fit 4 loaves in my mixer at a time. What's the maximum number of loaves you fold at a time? Okay, so I use these plastic 19-quart bins to do all my folding. So after I mix my dough in my mixer, I dump everything into my bins. Now, I just said that I can only mix 4 to 6 at a time in my mixer, comfortably 4, so I go with 4. 4 at a time in my mixer, and then I dump it into these bins. I can dump, I can put 12 loaves of dough in each of these bins. I can go for more, but I'm a small person, and I can't comfortably lift all that dough in a bin at once. So I can comfortably lift and fold 12 doughs in that bin. Is there an easier way to divide the dough into equal loaves? Tips, tricks, math? Yeah. So first of all, you will get better with this with time, because in the beginning I was terrible at it, and I would just go back and forth, like weighing and dividing, and it was just like a nightmare keeping all that math in my head. You will get better with this, definitely, with time. The more loaves you do and the more batches you do, you will get better with this. However, here's a tip. So what I like to do is, however many grams one recipe will give you, just go back like 20 or 30 grams, and then that's your minimum weight. So that when you start dividing your loaves, you just have a minimum weight. So that you're not like adding and subtracting each loaf and going over and over and over, like doing this math. Thanksgiving week, I'm selling frozen loaves and dinner rolls. Thawing, heating directions. Okay, so I think that the safest way to thaw and reheat is to take it out of the freezer and let it thaw completely, and then reheat it at 450 for about 10 minutes. This is the normal sourdough loaf. Okay, you can see online, like other people say something like, oh, you can just take it straight out of the freezer and put it in your oven at 325 and let that cook until it's warmed through. But then how do you know? How do you know when it's warmed through, right? So I think the safest thing to do is just to let it thaw and then reheat it at 450 for 10 minutes. The fastest way to thaw things is on a metal sheet pan. Flour sources you use: bread, wheat, rye. Yeah, okay, so You guys know my recipes. I use white bread flour, whole wheat bread flour, and I feed my starter rye and a mixture of rye and white bread flour. So I use wheat berries from my local mill. They grow their own wheat, and they grind their own. They mill and grind their own flour. In the beginning, I was grinding all the flour myself at home, and I quickly outgrew that. If I were to do that now, my bread would be like $50 because it's milling your own wheat is definitely a labor of love. If you don't have this resource of having a local mill, then a good brand, a good standard is King Arthur white bread flour. 52 loaves sold since October 1st. Just sending thanks to you from KS More Sourdough. I know who this is. This is Nancy. She teaches kindergarten full time, and selling sourdough is her side gig, and she is crushing it, crushing it. She sold 27 loaves her first week, and then sold 12 this past week. I'm like, success story. She's crushing it. Check her page out. It's more sourdough. Check it out. Sandwich bread. I can make amazing artisan bread, but sandwich is always dense. Okay. You can go there. You have options. One option is to just have a softer sourdough loaf. I will in the next slide I'll show you my soft white sourdough recipe. Next option is you can go the sourdough brioche route. And the slide after that, I will also share my sourdough brioche recipes.
Why would I choose between this one or that one when I know that I can have both?
Could you please guide to choose the good flour for sourdough bread? I live in Canada. I think you mean Canada. Okay, so guess what? Canadian all-purpose flour is basically American bread flour. So you have good flour. Your flour has more protein content. Your all-purpose flour has more protein content than American all-purpose flour. So if you use Canadian flour, look at your bread bag. Look at the package and see if it says any kind of protein percentage. You want to look for anything more than 12%. That's a good amount for bread baking. But yeah, since you live in Canada, I think you're safe. Your all-purpose flour is basically our bread flour. How can I revive an old sourdough starter that's been hibernating in the fridge? Easy. It's alive, so all you have to do is take it out of the fridge, wait for it to thaw, come to room temperature, and then you just discard a little bit and then feed it. And then just wait and see for any kind of activity. It probably won't rise because it's been hibernating in the fridge for so long, but it's not dead. I don't think it's dead. So just feed it and then wait for it to double, in size at least. You want to see the behavior of it going up and down, consistently. It may take 2 or 3 feedings, but I think it's still alive. How do you adjust your timeline when it's cold? Longer bulk ferment? Sure. So your fermentation timeline is controlled by temperature. So if it's cold in your house, you can either extend your room temperature proof or you just extend your cold proof too. So it just play around and calibrate your temperatures and times. But extending your bulk proof would it's probably the way to go because then you can easily control your fermentation as opposed to extending your cold proof. It's kind of hard to control your fermentation when your dough is in the fridge. You kind of just guess because fermentation is happening so slowly. So if it's cold in your house, I would the safest thing to do is probably to extend your bulk proof and then see how that goes for that one loaf. My starter never seems to double. Can I still use it or is it discard? Okay. So your starter doubling It depends on what you feed it. I know that when I feed my starter whole wheat, it never quite doubles in size. I know that my gluten-free starter, it never quite doubles in size too, but that doesn't mean that it's weak, okay? It just depends on what you feed it. If you are feeding your starter with white bread flour, it should double in size. So something's wrong. It's hungry. You can either discard and feed it again and see what happens. And if that's still not getting your starter to double, then I would not discard and feed it. Maybe the cultures need to build up. Can you show exactly what the cold proof dough should look like when it's ready to bake? Yeah, I'll show you in the next slide. I'll just share one of my reels where I show you where I'm showing you basically what the dough looks like when I flip it over out of its banneton. But here's what you want to look for. You want to look for a dough that can hold its shape so that when you flip it onto your parchment paper, it doesn't just go, it just doesn't go flat. You know, you want the dough to hold its shape. So when it's cold proofing in your fridge or going through its second rise in your banneton, you just simply do the poke test. So you poke it with your fingertip, you poke it slightly, and then if it has even a little bit of an indentation, it's time to bake. And if it's like really depressed, then it's overproofed. Work, 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 work. To me, I be work, 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 work. When a loaf comes out of the oven, why does cracking occur? What do you mean about cracking? I don't know what you mean by cracking. I do know that after the first half of baking, after you've baked with the Dutch oven lid on, technically your loaf is done cooking. The insides are done. The second half of cooking, when you're baking with the Dutch oven lid off, that's specifically to develop your crust. Okay, that's to brown your crust. And then when all of that baking is done, then you should let your loaf cool for like 2 hours, because you let it cool. It's kind of like steak. You know, when you cook steak, it needs some time to rest. It's kind of like that. You need to let everything cool off. If you don't, it might be a little bit doughy. I don't know what you mean by cracking. So DM me if I answered your question. Best ways to use discard. Okay, so there's like a billion, well, maybe not a billion, but there's a lot of discard recipes online, and there's many discard recipes online. I would recommend using discard for everyday things like pancakes, muffins, cookies, waffles. They're really good with discard. I personally just use my discard as starter. I just take the discard and make a dehydrated starter out of that. That's the easiest thing that I can do with discard, because sometimes I don't have time for discard recipes. Okay, last question. Some good pizza recipe? Thanks. Yeah, a really good pizza recipe. It's actually my most viewed reel on Instagram. I think it's got like over 600,000 views. It's like the reel that keeps on giving. So I'm gonna share that in the next slide.
True.
True. True.
True. True.